Tanzania's foreign minister described the outbreaks of internal violence as a few isolated incidents.
Imagine waking up to a landslide election win, only to see your country plunged into chaos and tragedy by nightfall. When democracy is erased and hundreds pay the price, the world must ask, what happened in Tanzania? It was a morning like many others in Tanzania. Warm, clear, alive with the sounds of marketplaces opening and distant radio broadcasts echoing through the streets. On election day, families awoke early, adults dressed with purpose. Children asked curious questions about democracy and the future. There was, underneath the daily ritual, a subtle energy, the hope that change, true change, might finally come. Parents gathered around battered kitchen tables, discussing which polling station would be safest, remembering elections of years gone by, how sometimes disappointment felt inevitable, but hope always returned with the sunrise. Friends in Dar es Salaam exchanged text messages, some lighthearted, some anxious. "We'll meet by the school and walk together," offered one. "Let's be careful, my father says soldiers are already nearby," replied another. Rumors swirled that this election, like too many before it, wouldn't be fair. But for many, the act of voting was more than a political engagement. It was a declaration of existence, of belonging, of the audacity to dream. As the morning progressed, lines formed outside polling stations. Men and women carried official slips, many clutching identity documents close just in case. The air buzzed with anticipation and, beneath the surface, uncertainty. Street vendors hawked roasted peanuts and sweet tea to those waiting in line, their voices a comforting reminder of everyday life. School children watched, eyes wide, learning lessons history could not always teach openly. Everywhere, the past lingered. Older generations traded stories about what democracy once promised and what it had delivered or failed to deliver. Among them were activists who had, over the decades, organized rallies, written pamphlets, and paid the price in arrests, intimidation, or exile. Yet Tanzania, for all its struggles, had never quite lost the sense that participation in elections, however flawed, mattered deeply. Even if the winners always seemed predetermined, even if protests were often met with silence or force, the people still came. This time, the stakes felt higher, the risks sharper. On election day, the government sought to present an image of control and celebration. Trucks flew the national flag. Security officers posed for photos with jubilant citizens. News crews carefully vetted, conducted interviews with those who pledged support for President Samia Suluhu Hassan. Social media feeds filled with filtered images, smiling voters holding up ink-stained fingers accompanied by hashtags promising unity. Privately, skepticism crept in. Opposition parties, fragmented and battered after years of repression, sent last-minute warnings. Prepare for irregularities. Do not trust unofficial numbers. Stay vigilant. International observers noted the heavy police presence around polling sites. Reports circulated about districts where opposition candidates had been removed or detained. Some polling stations never opened. Others closed early, citing security concerns. Still, as afternoon wore on, children played soccer near polling stations. Couples strolled home with groceries, and for a moment the rhythm of life seemed untouched. The promise of democracy was alive in every laughter and conversation, the belief that this time, perhaps, the will of the people could not be denied. But slowly, anxiety began to build. Messages about soldiers stationed at crossroads multiplied. Friends called to warn of unspecified threats. In neighborhoods known for opposition activity, the streets emptied earlier than usual. "Something feels wrong," whispered an elderly vendor, looking up from his cart. Nearby, a group of students debated whether to stay outside and celebrate, or retreat indoors as their parents insisted. As dusk approached, the sky turned violet and the city's pulse quickened. Radios crackled with official announcements. Record turnout. The nation speaks with one voice, but few believe the optimism. Those with internet access checked the latest updates nervously, seeing rumors of ballot box stuffing, missing election observers, escalating police patrols. And then, just as the sun sank behind the rooftops, the tension became unbearable. It vibrated through every home, every restless heart. People knew, with a certainty born of history, that something momentous was about to happen. Not the birth of a new democracy, but something darker. From behind closed doors, families watched their television sets. the evening news filled with imagery more staged than real. Whispered conversations grew louder, the volume on the radio dialed down low. Hopes clashed with dread. This was the last calm before the storm, a day filled with hope, swiftly sliding towards a night that would change Tanzania forever. The rigged election, how 98% was claimed. As midday approached, the anticipation in Tanzania ripened into palpable excitement and nervousness. Crowds thickened at polling stations while local news outlets showed smiling voters holding up ink-stained thumbs. Government observers issued statements praising the orderly proceedings and the enthusiastic turnout. But in hushed tones, citizens traded stories that told a different tale. Across city neighborhoods, some voters claimed they found only one candidate's name on their ballots. In rural districts, opposition monitors were nowhere to be seen. Many, it was whispered, had been arrested the night before or barred from polling places. A few daring citizens posted photos online of deserted stations, sealed ballot boxes stacked in back rooms, and security officers turning away voters who struggled to present government-issued IDs they had never been able to acquire. Social media feeds pulsed with reports from Gen Z activists, ballot papers pre-marked, names scrubbed from rolls, volunteers intimidated into silence. In universities, students streamed videos for as long as the internet allowed. "They say we are free, but freedom does not feel this way," one post read. Another showed a group of young people torn between laughter and disbelief, the slogan, "Democracy is not a magic trick," scribbled on cardboard. As the afternoon gave way to anxious twilight, families gathered near radios and televisions, waiting for results the way they might wait for a storm. At 7:02 p.m., the announcement blazed across every channel and station. President Samia Suluhu Hassan had won with a staggering 98% of the vote. The official statement was delivered with pride, promising a new era of prosperity and peace. Government supporters flooded the streets with cheers, waving flags, and chanting thanks. But for many Tanzanians, celebration was impossible. The opposition denounced the results instantly. "This is not a victory," one leader defected in secret. "It is an erasure of choice." Within minutes, screens filled with angry reactions, not just from defeated candidates, but citizens who knew, by the numbers, by the process, by their lived reality, that something fundamental had failed. The sense of betrayal cut deep. Gen Z influencers, once hopeful, now voiced raw indignation. "You cannot claim democracy with a pencil and a tank," one wrote. The truth couldn't be posted or shared for long. As tension reached its breaking point, messages began to disappear, accounts were suspended, internet speed throttled to a crawl. By nightfall, the mask of celebration slipped. Tanzania, bracing for something more than disappointment, teetered on the edge between silence and an uprising. The uprising and crackdown. Blood in the streets. The announcement of a 98% victory struck Tanzania like the first shockwave of an earthquake. Brief, jarring, soon followed by the deeper rumbling of the coming unrest. That night, the voices of dissent spilled from cramped living rooms and whispered phone calls onto the streets. In Dar es Salaam, the city center filled with the drumbeat of footsteps and the quick, nervous energy born from outrage. Flags and protest banners blossomed among the crowd. Chants echoed against concrete buildings, amplified by the hope and fury of young voices. "Tell the world, we will not be erased," cried a university student, waved high in the air by her friends. It was Gen Z, irrepressibly bold, who led the march, their faces gleaming in the light from hundreds of smartphones. Each step, each shout was a message sent out before the blackout descended. Images uploaded, stories shared, calls for help and solidarity born in a digital spring. But Tanzania's government was not unprepared. Riot police poured into city squares in full tactical gear, faces obscured behind visors. They moved with discipline and purpose, a choreography learned and rehearsed since previous crackdowns. Military trucks rolled through intersection after intersection, engines snarling as the night deepened, tires grinding debris and broken glass into the concrete. By 8 p.m., the first blockades went up. Protesters, refusing to yield, linked arms and sang old liberation songs, their defiance a flicker of the independent struggle long retold in the nation's schools. Yet the songs were cut short by the sharp hiss of tear gas. Canisters sailed in arcs above the crowd, bursting on the pavement and releasing clouds that stung the eyes, burned the lungs, and scattered the hopeful. The protesters fled, coughing, their resolve battered but not erased. It wasn't enough. Within the hour, the escalation continued. Police wielded rubber bullets, plastic shields, metal batons. Shouts of pain and anger replaced the chants as some fell and others carried them away. In alleys dimly lit by broken streetlights, women pressed makeshift bandages to wounds, calling for ambulances that would not come. Fires began to burn. Protesters tossed tires and debris into piles and set them alight. The flames illuminated their faces, faces determined and terrified, faces desperate to be seen. In the chaos, Gen Z activists clustered around hotspots of violence, trying to document the truth. One girl live-streamed the search for her missing cousin. Another, a young blogger, narrated the events for an audience that grew by the second, his voice trembling with each report of a new casualty. In the government strongholds, the reaction was swift and cold. Ministry officials met behind locked doors, barking commands into radios. "Contain," they repeated. "Isolate the agitators." Police raided the homes of prominent activists and opposition members, dragging some from their beds and others from late-night strategy sessions. For many, the only warning was the squeal of tires or the smashing of gates. Far from Dar es Salaam, the uprising spread like wildfire. In coastal cities, fishermen joined the struggle for dignity. Inland, miners and teachers and market vendors formed their own front lines. In the borderlands of Mwanza, the crackdown was swift. A peaceful crowd turned deadly as rubber bullets were fired into their midst, scattering protesters into the darkness. But nothing could outpace the violence in the capital. Hospitals filled before midnight, some arriving on foot, others carried by neighbors. Doctors triaged the wounded amid gunshots that continued outside their doors. Nurses whispered prayers as they applied stitches. The innocent and the passionate clustered together, hoping for miracles in a city shaken by betrayal. Social media posts chronicled the horror until, abruptly, they vanished. The government drove its blackout deeper, disabling networks, cutting cell towers, flooding the digital channels with propaganda. Where once there was constant chatter, now there was a deafening silence. The blackout was total. The only sounds were live, raw, and immediate. The shriek of sirens, the crackle of walkie-talkies, the howls of grief from families learning the fate of loved ones. Some tried to appeal to reason. Religious leaders stepped out into the crowd, holding copies of sacred texts and pleading for peace. A child handed a protester a flag, her eyes wide with confusion and awe. Elderly veterans of past struggles pressed coins into the hands of hungry youths, shaking their heads as they watched the violence unfold. "We thought we left this behind," one muttered. "It follows us, always." Within hours, Tanzania had become a nation of barricades. Whole districts were blockaded from the rest of the city, residents adapting quickly to new realities. No groceries delivered, no public transit, no assurance of safety. Supermarkets shuttered their doors as rumors of looting spread. At night, the fires burned even brighter, only to be extinguished with brutality by government forces. The regime's official response was as predictable as it was chilling. Announcements rang out across state radio, repeating the mantra that peace must be restored. Scratchy recordings warned citizens not to participate in illegal gatherings, threatening jail terms, fines, and worse. At 2 a.m., after a particularly violent surge, the Ministry for Home Affairs ordered the military onto the streets, and suddenly, the rebellion faced not just riot police, but hardened soldiers. Machine gun fire replaced the pops of rubber bullets. In the days that followed, the death toll soared. Human rights groups and opposition organizations struggled to count the loss, each report bleak but never quite complete. Whole families vanished, their houses empty except for the echoes of what might have been. In one hospital, a young nurse counted 18 bodies in a single night. Her hands could not stop shaking. Survivors told their stories the only way they could, through hushed voices, encrypted texts, or hurried phone calls to friends abroad. "We were standing, just chanting, when the army arrived," said a student. "We ran, but my friend, he was hit. They dragged him away." Parents clung to their children, teaching them to hide at the sound of a truck's engine or the flash of a uniform at the window. School teachers told their classes to memorize phone numbers and safe words, a lesson most never imagined giving. The scale of the crackdown was so vast that few neighborhoods emerged untouched. Some tried to resist with makeshift barricades and impromptu first aid stations. Others opted for quiet solidarity, refusing to betray neighbors to patrols even under threat. Urban artists painted murals in secret, tributes to the lost and the defiant, and yet, despite the blood and silence, hope poked through. In the midst of fire and fury, neighbors reached out. WhatsApp chains blazed in new forms, linking those stranded by violence to sources of food, medicine, and solace. Gen Z used encrypted apps to coordinate medical supplies and safe houses. Volunteers risked their lives to deliver aid to the wounded. Abroad, the Tanzanian diaspora mobilized, donations, advocacy, and witness. Famous athletes and artists spoke up for their people, wielding the power of eyes and ears beyond the blackout. Human rights defenders lobbied the UN and world governments, distributing testimony lifted from the carnage. In Tanzania, small bands of protesters continued to emerge from the smoke, their chants muted but their conviction undimmed. "We are not numbers," read a sign held by a wounded youth, "and we will not be erased." As dawn broke for the millionth time in Tanzania's long history, the streets remained stained and battered. The uprising was met with merciless force, yet the spirit of resistance endured. The day after the 98% election victory, Tanzania had become not just a nation in mourning, but a nation implacably, indelibly changed. Silenced voices, blackout, censorship, and grief. As the violence tore through Tanzania's cities and villages, the crackdown shifted from the physical to the invisible. While armored vehicles and riot police could be seen, the new weapon was silence, and silence came brutally fast. The blackout started with a flicker. In the capital, Dar es Salaam, young activists tried to upload videos of the protests, only to find social media lagging, buffering, refusing to send. In Mwanza, phones lost their signals, calls dropped mid-sentence. One by one, the platforms went dark. Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, a digital curtain descending over Tanzania. Families panicked as communication with loved ones failed. For some, the last message received was a hurried voice note. "Police coming, turn off your phone, stay safe." For others, an abrupt silence replaced the steady ping of online connection, the ache of uncertainty settling into their bones. Press offices, which had been abuzz with phones ringing and reporters strategizing coverage, sat hushed. Doors were locked. Editors stared at blank screens, knowing each word published would come with consequences they could no longer justify. Foreign journalists were rounded up, given hours to pack, then driven to the airport under police escort. A few hid, hoping for a way to smuggle stories out, a text, a tweet, a photo. But the risks outweighed the rewards. Staying put was a near certain ticket to jail, or worse. In rural towns, the blackout felt even heavier. Without robust infrastructure, villages depended on weak radio signals and fading batteries. Parents climbed hills to search for service, desperate for any word from their children in the cities. Traders who relied on digital payment platforms watched their livelihoods collapse overnight. The state broadcasted its narrative with relentless precision. On TV, polished news anchors congratulated the government and showed soft focus shots of peaceful communities. Police chiefs cited restored order. Ministers claimed that only a handful of armed agitators had been involved, and that they had been appropriately managed. Meanwhile, the true count, hundreds dead, thousands detained, was hidden away. It was as if Tanzania's grief had been scrubbed from the public record, but some refused to accept erasure. In the dead of night, activists gathered at candlelit tables and recorded messages on secret devices, describing the reality outside their windows. Doctors met in hospital basements to tally fatalities and document wounds, gunshots, baton injuries, chemical burns. Their testimonies, passed hand to hand, became the lifeblood of resistance. Community leaders walked from house to house, offering quiet comfort to mourning families. Religious figures led prayers for the departed. Services rushed, unpublicized, lest the authorities see and raid them. The country's grief was raw and heavy. In every household, someone was missing, someone was feared dead. Schools shuttered their doors. Universities canceled exams, not from lack of rigor, but from a terror that students would be targeted for their activism or even their proximity to dissent. Silence reigned in once boisterous classrooms. Some professors risked sending coded messages, encouraging young people to document their lives, to remember. "Without memory, the regime wins," wrote one brave academic. artists found new ways to grieve and protest. In Mwanza, a group of street painters snuck out before dawn and created murals, portraits of the fallen, bright colors defying the darkness, slogans that carried hope and warning. Within hours, many murals were painted over, covered by government crews, but the photos had already spread. In the digital underground, Gen Z became Tanzania's heartbeat. Using encrypted apps and hidden Wi-Fi signals, they coordinated food drops, medical aid, and rescue missions. Their memes, usually playful and bold, turned sharp and wrenching, depicting the absurdity of official unity against the stark bitterness of grief. Messages were broadcast in code, passed in photos of ripped posters, old school notebooks, symbols painted in corners barely visible. Across the border, the diaspora mobilized. Tanzanians living in Nairobi, London, New York emailed videos and voice notes back into the blackout, amplifying calls for justice. They raised funds for displaced families, lobbied governments, and held vigils in foreign parks. Their activism brought Tanzania's pain to the world stage, briefly breaching the official silence. Within families, the anxiety crystallized into rituals of remembrance. Nightly, candles burned for the missing, names recited in the hope that somewhere, that person was listening. Children were taught not to speak with strangers, to recognize which buildings would offer safety, which words could trigger a police raid. Funerals blurred into one, another, a nation nearly weeping itself dry. Sometimes the only sound in a neighborhood was the howl of a mother who refused to surrender hope, calling out a child's name into the silent dark. For some, grief became anger. In Arusha, undercover protest groups reassembled, planning new actions even against impossible odds. They whispered plans for slowdowns, strikes in factories, encrypted organizing in marketplace stalls, and boda taxi networks. Every person was a link in the chain. Every link was precious and at risk. But for many, the silence was suffocating. Anxiety gnawed at elders who had survived similar violence many years before. "I thought democracy would save us," murmured one, clutching a battered photograph of his missing grandson. "I thought we were done with this forever." Government officials used every tool at their disposal. They issued new curfews and travel restrictions, demanding lists of citizens at checkpoints. Informers roamed cities in plainclothes, listening for any whiff of dissent. Even old friends had to be careful. One wrong word could mean arrest. The blackout was total, not just of communication, but trust. Friends communicated with coded gestures, secret knocks at windows, and the near-mythic power of belief. Don't forget, don't forget, don't forget. If silence was the regime's weapon, memory and solidarity became Tanzania's shield. Occasionally, a breach appeared. A message slipped through, a photo sent by satellite, proof of the violence. The world saw images of burned vehicles, broken bodies, empty market stalls, and wept. International leaders responded, condemning the blackout and violence. NGOs dispatched envoys, though many were refused entry or immediately surveilled. News agencies ran stories about the total erasure of democracy in Tanzania. But as days passed and the regime persisted, coverage faded. Still, in bedrooms and basements, fathers taught sons how to bear witness. Mothers shared recipes for healing, not from hunger alone, but from the wounds of silence and terror. Poetry flourished even as music quieted. Words became resistance, stories became community. One mother whispered stories to her children. "Once, we spoke freely. One day, you will again." In time, the silence would crack. Witnesses would speak. The truth would reclaim its place. For now, Tanzanians endured, stitching together their broken days, honoring the missing, and dreaming of a world where every voice could ring out across the dark. Aftermath in the unyielding spirit. As the days stretched into weeks, Tanzania's wounds refused to close. The blackout slowly lifted, but pain lingered everywhere. Markets reopened, yet the silence was thick. Schools tried to resume classes, though the missing students' names stung every roll call. Graffiti quietly reappeared on battered walls, a prayer for freedom, a promise to remember. International condemnation grew, with foreign governments calling for accountability, transparency, and new elections. The Tanzanian diaspora sent funds and lobbied the world to hear their cry. But change proved slow, and the government clung to its narrative. Our victory is absolute. Peace has returned. In hidden corners, resistance survived. Artists, teachers, medics, and the spirited youth of Gen Z kept the memory of those lost alive through whispered stories, encrypted messages, and unyielding solidarity. Their courage, forged in devastation, became Tanzania's heartbeat. Families gathered at dusk, lighting candles to honor the names that could not be erased, teaching children to dream beyond fear. Across houses, alleys, and distant fields, the refrain echoed, "We are Tanzania. We endure. We hope." This, above all, is what it means to endure. This, above all, is what it means to remain unyielding. Thanks for watching. Tanzania's story isn't over. Its people's hope and courage remain. Share this video, keep the conversation alive, and never let silence erase the truth.